Okay, so my name is Ricardo. Hi. I will talk a little bit about some aspects of my work or like guiding aspects of my work. Um, because most of what I do in the past years is very long, I cannot really like show a work. So I will maybe show a couple of snippets, and I encourage discussion very much. So if you have any questions or any doubts or any comments or want to talk about something, please feel free. Like very, I want it to be like a very informal setting where we just talk. So I will tell a little bit about how I work and why I work how I work, and then we can discuss about something. It's very difficult.
You want me to sit behind the curtain?
No, 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 no. It's all good. It's all good. Okay, so I kind of prepared kind of a rough kind of guideline of what I will talk about, and we will see how it goes. I'm very bad at explaining what I do, and I've been trying to do it for years, and it's just the way I talk and think. So things will go a little bit like this. And again, so if there is anything that's not clear, please interrupt me or tell me or ask me. It is all good. So what I want to focus on and what I do focus on in my work, I have like a couple of guidelines that I work with, basic guidelines on which on which composition happens, so to say. And no, wait, I have to take my glasses off, otherwise I can't read this. And to explain these guidelines, I will have to do a little bit of like a history detour, but it will all circle back at some point. So I will just say the basic guidelines, and then I will explain them. So the first one is perception is affected by environment and context. I personally do not believe in pieces or music existing in a vacuum. However, sound or art is received, for me, influences a lot what I do with it. So, for example, as a composer, it is very important for me to be very aware of, or to construct a situation where the parts of perception are built into the composition, so to say. I will come back to that soon. The second guiding principle that I have is the one of aura. So the individual aura of specifically performers, for me is part of the composition. Like I work with specific people. I normally, or for the past 5 years or so, very rarely do work that can be performed by many different people. So if I work with these people, the work, the thing I develop with the people that I work with stays in there. It's not like I write a score that can be passed from ensemble to ensemble. I have done this a lot, but it's something that has slowly fizzled out in my production. And the third guiding principle that I work with a lot is the notion of gaze and oppositional gaze. So gaze in like art history sense, like the way of looking and what it means. So to circle back to this first aspect of perception and context, I would sum up my work, and in the examples I will show, as a work that focuses a lot on the body. For me, I like to think of the body as kind of where all the kind of exchanges in perception happen. I don't think of music normally as a pure acoustical experience. I think about for me, it's very important to consider what the body is, what the body of the audience is, the performer, etc., 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 and this affects a lot how I work. And normally these things are worked into what I do. So now the small detour. Why I focus so much on body? So basically, in a very, 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 very broad sense, there is a I wrote it down here in a nicer way. There is a Brazilian sociologist I like a lot called Gessé Souza. He's a very famous Brazilian sociologist. He's alive, and he, for the last, I guess, 20-30 years, has basically studied the history of oppression. And in this study of his, which is now like dozens of books that he has written about class and race and gender and all these different things, he's part of a school of thought that sees kind of the organization of the Western world today as a consequence of a very old notion of separation of spirit and body. That becomes how do you say it? It becomes kind of what is the word? There is it just escaped me. It becomes valued. That's the word. Valued. So like the value systems arise out of this. Now I translated a paragraph from Gessé de Souza, which I will read, but it's a little bit dense. So in case it's not so clear, we can also take it bit by bit. In which it's very kind of summary of this kind of basic idea of this kind of value system that is very important to me and to how art works in general, and culture and people in the end. So, Gessé de Souza says, history of oppression starts with a combination of ancient Greek with Judeo-Christian ways of being, notions of an individual in relation to morality, as well as the hierarchy between spirit and body. The soul, in the then religious world, was the way towards God, the way towards salvation for Christians, which we see, for example, in how Saint Augustus absorbs Platonic influences into Christianity, promoting notions like you will be saved if you control your bodily passions. First and foremost, sex and aggression. Then you're saved. This religious hierarchical notion will eventually turn into a profane one in the 18th century. It is Kant who will end up defining the architecture of the human spirit in a way that will become hegemonic after him. This human spirit, written with a big S, will be intelligence, morality in the sense of honesty and autonomy, and aesthetic capability. What will the body be then? It will be that which brings us closer to animality, affections, feelings, and corruption, as the animalistic distance from morality. Everything that we evaluate in the West, consciously or not, everything that is good, virtuous, superior, is associated with the spirit/soul. And when you want to animalize, oppress, or humiliate, you connect it to the body. All cultural and social domination, oppression, couple, coming from the West will happen exclusively according to one paradigm. Those who dominate will see themselves as representatives of the soul, intelligence, morality, good aesthetical taste, as Kant says. In other words, everything that has to do with virtue and that we perceive as beautiful and good has to do with the spirit. And everything that is inferior will be connected to the body, because the body is what connects us to animals and not to God. So, those who dominate will present themselves as representatives of the soul or the spirit, and those who are dominated or oppressed will be constructed and portrayed as being inferior or bodily. This is important because those who are oppressed also need to be convinced that they deserve their own oppression. This paradigm is present, be it in one culture oppressing another, gender, class, ethnicity, skin color, all works within the same principle. And then the example is the global north is the spirit, the global south is the body historically. And then it can break down into a million different categories. The forms of oppression are interchangeable. It is the same grammar that produces the same effects and destroy the same thing in people, our necessity of social recognition. And if you refuse this social recognition to individuals or segments of society, you inevitably condemn these people to not having any self-esteem, self-worth, or dignity. That's it. Are there any questions about that? Yes, please. Herr Professor.
Could you repeat again? There were, I think, at 2/3 of your text or so, you had 3 examples of what it means, the bodily, you had example, or the suppressed, you were referring to being,
The categories?
I guess so, yeah. Or perhaps if you could project the text, I could quickly scan it too.
Oh, it looks very bad, the text, just a second. Let me make it bigger. And
There you go, great. Thanks.
that's what I just read.
Oh, okay.
Also, there might be a lot of typos. I just translated it like yesterday into not the best English in the world. I can make it bigger. Is this fine?
Yeah.
So, at what time? When was that written?
This must be in the 90s, I suppose.
Because I was wondering how that might be in dialogue with embodied cognition. I think, yeah, embodied cognition also came about like in the 90s. Francisco Varela, you know.
I mean, this kind of school of thought that sees like basically like Cartesian thinking and Kant as kind of the originators of modern day repression, sexism, patriarchy, racism. It, at least in South America, it exists at least since the late 70s, and it builds on itself. So it's like, more simple in the beginning. Nowadays, there's a lot of different people that write a lot about this, and this is one that I think is more. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not an anthropologist, so I understand what he writes. Also, some Heloísa Buarque de Holanda is a very famous feminist sociologist that writes about similar topics, and also is very accessible for people not in her field, which is why I use this example as well. And I think the language is not so specific to Brazil that other people can also kind of of get is okay. Should I leave it or I leave it? Good, I leave it. So, I mean, I didn't say this. I am from Brazil, which is why I like this. And for me, I guess what I like about this and what this has to do with what I do is that to a certain extent, this is a process. It's also a parenthesis. It's very hard for me to talk about anything I do without some kind of biographical information because I think it has kind of a influence in what I do. This kind of process that he describes here, that is very like big historical processes, it happens very in small scale to individuals, and to a certain extent it also happened to me when I moved to Europe to study here, to study classical music, which is a music in which I don't exist in basically. Like when I was in Brazil studying it, you read the history books and it doesn't exist, we don't exist, so to say, and all these kind of layers of like we're the third world, here's the first world, this all kind of builds in to where you try to do things a certain way, and then slowly for me over the years, over many years, 12, 13, 14 years, what happened was a very slow process of deconstructing ideas and notions, especially these kind of notions of good and bad and why is it, just asking, learning kind of critical thinking, and asking yourself, why am I insisting so much on doing this that I don't particularly like, or why do I feel this thing that I like a lot is very bad, etc., etc., etc. And it is a current, also since quite a while, within many different areas of art, coming from these places, to do work. This happened for me very organically, but then after it happened, I started, of course, searching for people that do similarly or think similarly to get in dialogue. And it is a very common thing for many artists that from diverse areas who go through this experience to have, which is funny somehow, to have work focusing on the body, especially, I think it has a lot to do with a kind of like bringing it back and bringing back value to and trying to break this kind of duality. And you really see it a lot in everyday life, and it's not exclusive to here, it happens everywhere in the world. A good example, there's so many examples, but yeah, a good example, for example, in dance is like dance that can be seen as sexualized is normally vulgar or bad. Dance that is more abstract is good. It's like everything basically that brings it down to this kind of this kind of duality of when things go to the body, they are normally perceived as less than. And this is a very like a posteriori kind of yes.
The example you just mentioned with dance, I think, is not bad, because you say that bodily dance is viewed as vulgar and inferior and stuff like this, or sexualized dance.
Yeah.
But that only pertains to whom actually? I mean, if you ask the masses, like all the people in, let's say, Germany, and show them just a popular dance piece, I don't know, just rap, music video, whatever, are you sure that they will agree that this is bad? Because it's actually mass taste, kind of. So what you are saying?
I think they will. I think they will. It's even for example in Brazil. Brazil is a very Brazilian culture has a lot of sexuality in it, but extremely Catholic. So people do it, but not for family. It's like for the classic example is like. I will hook up with somebody like that, but I would never date them. or like, I like to see the music video, but I wouldn't let my children do it.
But
You know?
on the other hand, you have things like, let's say, MTV Music Awards, which constantly rank this kind of content pretty high, and it's what I think actually what your standpoint actually pertains to is the academic circle.
I mean, it is where value is defined and discourse is produced. So also that's another thing. Like one thing is just informal knowledge, people speaking between themselves. Another thing is writing a book about something that people have to learn in school, etc. This all, yes.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Christoph, because I was thinking, and that's also why I wanted to see the text, when you were saying, and we should probably get to your music as well.
No, it's fine. This is more interesting than the music for sure.
When you were talking about the soul and the spirit, so those who dominate and then those who are oppressed, aka the soul versus the bodily. So with the bodily there, this Sousa, if that's how you pronounce it, I don't know, talks about the animalization, oppression, and humiliation. And then I was like, holy shit, the USA just voted for Trump, and this is literally what he does. Animalize, oppress, humiliate.
Exactly.
But that's kind of against what I mean, it shows that what he says is actually has been just evolved into kind of, because the majority of North America has voted for some.
This exists. This is the majority of the world.
Wait, let me finish.
Yeah.
So, the majority of people in the U.S. just voted for like the leader, he who will suppress, so he who dominates.
Yeah.
And he is actually in this category of the bodily. So it's kind of the opposite.
No, I don't think he is.
Because
I don't think he is.
That's your view.
I don't think he is.
He's selling Bibles, So
Yeah, but he's doing many
How
things.
how do you say
Wait. You say you're I can't pronounce his name. I'm so sorry. But animalize, oppress, humiliate. And he's the person who's known to boast about grabbing women by the genitalia.
Yeah, but what are women in this thing? Closer to animals than men, which allows him to do that.
True, that's true. But the category, I mean, the way what he does falls into these categories.
No,
So
he's practicing it way more, and that's why so many men vote for him, and that's why so many people vote for him.
May I just say something here before we go
It's more complex
too
than that.
deeply into US politics and get depressed? I think the main argument here, and I don't know whether the soldier was, he was probably familiar with Donna Haraway's.
Yeah.
And Haraway also made this point that essentially these categories, right, particularly dualisms, body, mind, man, woman, human, animal. She also made the argument that all these categories are instrumentalized and they become instrumental in enforcing power relationships of oppression and so on. So this is, it's not a new argument, and it's been made a lot also in gender studies.
Yeah. Of course, yeah. And I think also to your point, it doesn't mean these structures are there. What this say, and this is again, it's a mini thing of like a giant thing. But what it says is not that we should imagine a holy priest looking down. No, it's horrible people that enslave people and rape and do horrible things and kill and torture. They do all these things, but they are in a position of power. So Trump can do whatever he wants, but he does this. He animalized foreigners and women and LGBTQ community, and he practices it. So we can be like, oh, he's disgusting, but that he can become president is a proof of this.
Sure, but on the other hand, it is a putting aside of the more intellectual, in this text referred to as the more spiritual side of society, because they voted Washington out, they voted people, the moderates, the people who think through, like the rational people are gone, and they voted in a person who is actually more...
I mean, I cannot speak...
wait.
Yeah.
They voted in a person who is much more part of what probably 20 years ago would have been called the vulgar culture or whatever, everything associated with that. So I think the only thing I want to say is I don't have answers, but I just think it's a complex issue, perhaps.
Yeah, this is one.
And that I think also something has changed now. It's of course a process, a gradual process, but what just happened in the US shows, and it's happening in many places, shows that there is again this kind of something that is kind of flipping inside this whole system.
I mean, I think you're right that it's like it would be considered vulgar 20 years ago, but I think the point is it's not now. I think the system didn't move at all. It just changed the people and how to view the people who get up and down in it.
Mm-hmm, sure.
But for me, Trumps represent the same as somebody else 20 years ago who would take his place. Yeah.
But you can't say that he would be a representative of the soul part of this description. It's not like
he does. Evangelicals vote on him.
Okay, but that's for other reasons. Okay.
No,
anyway,
it's
that's
for
a long
this.
conversation.
But it is for.
Move on, but
I think this is really, perhaps we should zoom out a little bit, look
sure.
at the big picture, and this is really about categories, right? And categories are always in the making; they are never fixed. So they also change. Our perception of them changes, but if they are there, and I think the argument here is that they do historical, political, and cultural work. Right?
I actually think
are important, and they have been used as tools of oppression. I think that's the argument.
And I think the Trump example is actually really good because one way to think is what you're saying, but the other way to think is Trump, who is a white man, won against a woman of color.
Yeah, of course.
That was way more qualified, but, and I think this is where these kind of structures, you see how ugly they are and how ingrained they are everywhere and how we grow up with these things and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they are always in the making. Like this, again, this is my bad translation of an introduction paragraph of a big book out of many books. And of course, things are super complex and trickle down into specifics, etc. This is a book about a segment of class in Brazilian society in the 1980s. So it's also like, that was written now looking back, so it's also like, again, is just something to give some context. Yeah. Any further questions about Also, I'm not a sociologist, and I am not great at explaining everything. I can recommend the books. Some of them have been translated. Yeah. Is it good? Good. So, moving on, I will then slowly just... So for me, how this translates into music making is that so again, a little bit of a biographical background. I do not come from classical music. I come from playing in bands. And my musical education is, playing in bands, playing very different kinds of bands in my youth, and kind of learning by making, up to the moment I decided to enter university. Which is also when I learned to read scores. Like I learned it first with 18. Before I had never, I think, even seen one or looked at one. And the one thing that I always found fascinating when I moved to more and more experimental part of the musical education because of affinity and interest is I would miss certain aspects of this kind of environment that I used to make music in, but in a very kind of non-articulate way. Like I just missed it, but I didn't know what it was. Like, what is it? It's just kind of a feeling. And I always thought, it's just me getting old. I just miss what I did when I was a teenager, maybe. But with time, what I came to find out for myself is that one thing that I missed a lot about these environments is how the perception of music works very differently on your body than in kind of classical concert situation, where we're sitting down, we're all anonymous, we are in the dark looking at a stage where we can reflect and think about what we're seeing and have an intellectual process about it, which is very different than, for example, going to a very loud show or going to a club, where you have first an experiential process because you're doing many things at the same time. You're maybe dancing, you're maybe flirting, it's maybe too loud, you're maybe singing the song together with the artist or something, and you think about it afterwards. So first you're immersed in a situation and you have an experience that is not permitting you to reflect as it goes, and you reflect afterwards. So this was the first thing I thought, like, oh yeah, that's actually very interesting. I never thought about that. That's very nice, or very interesting, and started to read up on that and research and so on. And then I started to do little experiments. I work. I have a club night in Berlin. I work a lot in clubs since many years, and started paying attention to this kind of thing more and more, and let it kind of start slowly influencing or seeping into compositional work. And then this kind of opened a certain amount of aspects that I started seeing as very fundamental compositional aspects. One is this: what the audience does and what the musicians do influence how you're taking it in. And what does this mean in a compositional sense to me? This means that, for example, time works differently. 15 minutes or 1 hour, let's say 1 hour in a concert where we're all sitting down might feel very long. 1 hour in a club is not long at all. And I didn't know why this happened. But I know it happens because I go to a club and it doesn't, like, I have to be many hours to get tired, and I go to a concert and in 40 minutes I'm tired. So, depending on the concert, of course. Depending on the concert, of course. But so, for example, this kind of relation between what the audience is doing, how the situation is organized to perception of time, started to have a very big effect on me on, for example, notions of form. How I think compositional form, if I can use time in a different way, if I can, for example, have the audience walk all the time, time will feel different. An hour is not an hour, half an hour is not a half an hour. Like, things are, you start kind of moving things around. And then I started through the years experimenting more and more and more with this. By speaking of time, I have no idea when I started. I'm just talking. Somebody just tell me if I'm going too long, because now I have
32 minutes.
Okay.
But to be honest, we interrupted you a lot. So
No, it's good. It's not interruption. It's discussion. It's discussion. Okay, good. I will give a few examples just so you have an idea of what I talk about, and then we can do questions, because otherwise it will just go and go and go and go. Let me see what I have here. So, for example, one project I did, or let me actually go. Yeah, no, this is the first thing I did. The first time I did this was 2019, and it's a piece I did called a fuse piece, which is very simple, and it's been done in like a bunch of times, and every time it's different. So the idea was the piece is a fuse, like you light a fuse, because it's a way for me to visualize time. The fuse burns, and then you literally see a timeline, so to say. And then I will create every time I do it, it's in an open space. The audience can come in, and I create kind of a situation where things start happening. There is no musicians to be seen or loudspeaker, although they are there, they're all hidden. And very simply, this is a little teaser from one festival that we did it in. But just to explain it's very, very simple timeline. So it takes about half an hour, 40 minutes. The fuse burns. It goes through a parkour. Initially, everything is very didactic. So the fuse burns. It goes behind the piano. Something explodes. It goes there. Something falls down. And then slowly things start happening that doesn't connect. So the fuse is over there. Something there explodes. The fuse is here. Something there falls down. This kind of is very, very simple. And throughout this whole thing, there are two musicians that are hidden. And for example, here you will see this big hall. This entire wall, there's subwoofers all along this wall. So very slowly, throughout 40 minutes, they're getting louder and louder and louder and louder. It's just one big sound that starts with a shh from the fuse burning. So, and it's already there before the audience arrives. So they don't really notice it. And it just gets louder and louder and louder, and things start shaking. These walls start shaking. In this case, these walls, this was where they build trucks. So the walls start shaking, things start shaking. And then eventually this causes some kind of reaction. It's basically very simple, compositional building of tension. And there is no relief, basically. It just goes and goes and goes and goes. And every time I've done it, people run away. People take away their children. Because in the end, of course, there is a box in the middle. And the fuse goes into the box. And the box is in the middle of the audience. Of course, nothing happens. But yeah, this festival made this teaser. You can have a little bit of an idea of how it works. That's a teaser. It's not the best teaser, but
the sound we hear, Ricardo, is what the subwoofers are doing?
It doesn't sound like this. Uh-huh. This is whatever they were using to record, I guess, from the camera. You don't hear this boo pitch. It's really kind of a white noise, and then it's really low frequencies that you feel more than you hear. Yeah. So that was the first kind of experiment I did with this, and it was very nice to do it a bunch of times because then I was always kind of changing and tweaking it. And I was very happy that it did cause kind of a reaction and people did feel something. In this case, I also, in most of these first things I did, there was a lot of kind of mediation. So it starts very harmless. And people are very they have time to think, and then slowly it just gets more and more and more and more intense. The second thing I did in this direction, which also there is a festival teaser from, was a concert. They invited me to make a concert in a theater house in Stuttgart. And instead of doing a piece, I decided to just curate a concert and have the audience move all the time. So they never stop moving. Or there are some moments where they sit down, but it's very 5 minutes sitting and then moving. And the project was called Looking Out into a Room. I will just show you the thing and then I can explain how it works. Actually, can we maybe turn off the lights? I think this is a very dark video. Thank you. So yeah, the concept here was, it's probably a bit confusing from the teaser, but it was quite simple. So there was this building, there were different rooms. The audience was basically guided through two types of situations. Either they were listening to a piece but having to move all the time in different ways, and if they stopped moving, the music would stop. So they kind of like a record player, like they need to keep walking in a certain way, and every time they would sit, there would be screens in the room, and in some way, because it was also, it's constant movement, you also kind of lose, there was a lot of smoke, you lose a little bit which room you're in, ta-da-da. And every time they would sit and be able to relax, suddenly curtains would open and there would be drones filming from the outside, and they could see themselves in screens inside the room. And this was also then transmitted online to online audience who could. There was cameramen also walking with them. Yeah, basically that. Yeah.
So where does there was someone that was always guiding the
It was a
audience?
mix. It was a mix. There was somebody, when they arrived, they were informed that they would be. I mean, it also already in the invitation, when people got their tickets, they would get this note that like they will be filmed, they will be online, and they have to move. And then when they got there, there was one person that identified themselves as the door and asked people to kindly follow them. And that was the only thing that was said. Can you please follow me? And then they go in the room, which is what you see in the beginning. Like me and another person are in a room and we go in from one side and the audience goes in from the other side. And then a cameraman comes as well. And then they start this kind of slow, everything's very slow, it's like a choreography. And there would be like basically two audiences. You would have the audience in the place doing this kind of parkour. Then you have an audience online who was watching it with the audience as part of the piece, because they were doing, they were kind of doing with the musicians. So the musicians would be in a circle, the audience is kind of doing kind of a walking around, and depending from the camera angles, and this was all basically composed, like all the camera, like we would mark everything, and like at this minute you have to be here, at this minute you have to be there, the curtains need to open. So like this is what I mean with like composing these different things, and then like pieces. And basically what I did was I picked pieces from the options that they gave me that were like, it was also kind of curiosity from my side, to pieces that were super static, like this what is playing in the teaser, this in these pieces the audience would be moving all the time. And then pieces that were, I mean, not as a rule, but mostly like the more static a piece was, the more active the audience was, and the whole situation. So the musicians would stand up and they would come in a circle and the audience would come with them, and then the audience would sit down and then there would be something else happening, and then suddenly these drones would come in, or this kind of situation.
So if I understand right, so there was like this many pieces of different composers.
Yeah.
And also your piece.
There was an old piece, yeah.
And these pieces were then somehow choreographed together, like spatially.
Yeah, and
they like you did it, or was it like everyone's decision? Like,
no. This I would say this is the composition, so to say.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the next step from this was I just did everything. Then I just made a piece that works for this situation, either very simple, just like ensemble in the middle, everybody can stand and dance or do whatever they want, or like, for example, right now, a months ago or something in Berlin, I did one that had this kind of parkour. The audience was all the time moving around in a very big hall, very big like concrete hall, so they would go very far away and come very close to the ensemble and just sit with the ensemble, and just this kind of thing.
Do the audience have a projection on how they move, or they decide themselves how they want to move in this piece?
Both. The
Both.
different pieces, different things. For example, I mean, I don't want to extend myself. I can show very quickly the free thing.
Because maybe what I'm asking is, you mentioned before that you're kind of interested in, I got this impression in the club culture and this relationship between audience and how the audience is different in these kind of different cultural contexts, like, and how it differently perceives the time. My first thought, and when I was watching this, was like, I don't want to accuse it, but in some places it felt a bit maybe authoritative, that the audience somehow has to move, because I come in the club, I can dance, it's my choice. Maybe music, maybe I don't like the music, I don't want to dance. But in this context, they kind of have to, they become like more than the audience, they become performers, they have to work, kind of.
No, this is not this is, you're 100% right.
Yeah.
This is not, in this project, it is very authoritative. And the audience is put in this situation where they are constantly being moved, and they're constantly feeling that they're being watched, because they see it. Every time a curtain opens, they see screens in the room with themselves. they have to react to the situation. Some of them think it's funny, people leave. I think very often when I do something, people leave. It happens. There's always somebody that gets bothered. There are other, like this, just as an example, I have other projects where people can just do whatever they want. Like this one, I just show like a couple of seconds. You can see it's very simple. It's just an ensemble in the middle, and people can do whatever they want. It's just very loud, and then you see people start kind of low-key dancing, or they sit down on the floor. This for me, I think the point for me is all of this is composition for me. Like, I want to create a situation for the audience to have a certain kind of experiential experience. I'll just stop that. And the piece and the whole thing is kind of a vibe, is kind of a mood. So for example, for that project, yeah, the audience felt it can be a level of discomfort, which is fine. But some people also like it. But that is a thing, that's a compositional decision. I want the audience to be kind of moved around and observed and to be aware of it. Whereas here, people can do whatever they want. And in another project, maybe a little bit of both. Or there is another, I will just explain it quickly instead of showing it, where the audience starts as a regular concert, sitting down, but there is a screen like this in front of them with a text explaining what's happening, and the ensemble is 50 meters away. And eventually they have to go to the ensemble to be able to hear the piece. So it starts as a regular concert situation, dark, nobody sees each other, and then slowly the text also suggests it, but people can do it if they want. So all of these things for me are like, they are all compositional decisions. And they affect how, in the end, and I guess this is what we didn't talk about and probably will not talk about, it affects also how the music will sound and how long things are. Because, for example, if I can control the movement of the audience, I can control a lot of things. If I cannot, then I have, like, everything is kind of like a compromise. If the audience is sitting, I can control these things. If I get the audience moving, it's those things. If I leave everybody to do what they want, it's something. For example, now this concert I just did where people were kind of moving around, there were no chairs. Some people didn't like it and left. They're like, oh, I want to sit down, but there is not that option. You can sit on the floor, you can move around, but you cannot sit on a chair. That creates a certain thing that for me shapes how pieces, how long it is, how long this section takes, how long I will work on this material.
So this is about movements from the audience, but do you take also the audience as a part of the sound making also? Like if they collaborate without even knowing before coming, or I don't know, with the
yes and no. So for example, for me, in this last project I did, the fact that they move very far away and very close, it changes the sound.
Yeah, okay.
It changes how you hear.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if it's a big like concrete hall with a lot of like natural reverb, it changes it a lot. Maybe the audience is not aware of it, but for example, in this situation, we would play like just a very basic texture that is not changing for a very long time to give the audience time to go away and come back. For the audience, the sound changes a lot. But for us performers, it doesn't. So in this case, yes, in the case of the audience doing active things, I think this is also a little bit about your dictator comment. Like, I'm very much like control freak. I am very much a composer in the very basic sense. And for me, I'm not so much interested in improvisation or creating super super free situations. It can be participative, but within certain rules of the game, so to say, for me.
Because with this paradigm and those two positions we talked about in the beginning, I was wondering if like breaking the barrier between audience and performer was a thing or like a goal, or I don't know.
I think this also comes to a sub point of that, which is what I said about context. So for me, this kind of things make a lot of sense within new music, where there is a certain tradition of doing things a certain way and the audience is used to a certain type of behavior. So having the audience move or stand or experience super loud sound, this can already be something that gets in the way of this very kind of reflected listening, reflexive, or like, which is also, this is also not a critique on that. I also like it. I go to concerts. I also like to think when I listen to music, not always, but I do. It's just something else. So basically trying to create a kind of like a bodily situation or experiential situation. I just go to the body for me as a thing that I think about when I'm doing art, so to say. On the other hand, for example, I said I have a club night, I play a lot in parties. In the club night that I organize, this makes zero sense if I want to change anything. So we do the opposite. We have in the middle, 3 o'clock in the morning, after like super loud music, we have like contemporary art performance that is silent. And people just sit down and look. And it's a little bit the same effect, so to say. You break a situation, you break a form of perception, and you introduce a different way of perceiving. And have this affect how people perceive themselves, perceive the situation, perceive time, etc., etc. And then in an ideal situation, people think about it after the fact, what this kind of makes them feel in some way.
Do you compose, so when there's audience and it's walking and it's creating sound when they walk fast or slow, or like, do you also accommodate, or like not accommodate, maybe that's not the right word, but do you also create music when you create music in this process and you know that you want audience to be walking and that will generate sound?
Yeah, this is exactly what I do. Yeah, like this, what I just showed. This is my music that I composed, and this just what I said. This in this big hall, it's a piece I wrote for classical musicians that sit there and they play this for 40 minutes. Or this for example, I wrote it for these people, and I guess it's like almost 2 hours long, or a bit over 2 hours. And they play it from beginning to end. And all these things for me are, I'm just talking about the other things, but there is sound composition as well is part of it. I just normally think the sound composition in relation to these, like they're all kind of parts of the same thing for me.
No, maybe what I meant by my question is that, you know, when the audience is moving.
Yes.
I'm not saying that you don't.
No.
But I was maybe my point was when the audience is walking, it generates the sound by itself, and then some, for example, just like I don't know, quiet piece that someone is playing an ensemble, and the audience is.
You mean like walking?
Yeah, about that. I wanted to ask about
okay.
how you deal with this and.
My pieces are normally super loud.
Oh.
As you saw with the subwoofer, like. A lot of times, I mean, in this one where it wasn't like a piece, it was just like other people's pieces. There was this aspect that was built into it, like the super quiet thing. People were walking in a circle around all the time, and you could hear everybody, and it was kind of part of the situation, so to say. You could hear the clothes, you could hear the feet, and because it's a circle, this is also. Everything for me always have like many layers of why I do them. Because it was a circle, people also saw like I'm walking here, the musicians are in the middle, but I also see you on the other side. Like I always see audience doing things, and I see the people who are making noise, and if I make noise, I see people look at me, and it creates a situation of self-awareness, so to say. And this can also, it's also a thing, so to say, in compositional terms, it's material. For me, everything is material, everything is functional. So if it has the function that I need for this part, I will use this material. And if the music is very quiet and the people will be walking and it will be a bit awkward, then it is because I want that situation in that moment. But yeah, that's an example of that, I would say. Otherwise, normally my music is very, very loud and you cannot hear if people are walking. Or I even encourage people to like drink or bring your beer or whatever. It doesn't bother me. Or people take pictures or film. It's all. For me, it's part of the situation of getting this specific audience out of a certain practice into another practice that is as musical as, that is as experimental as, etc., etc., etc.
Ricardo, can I ask a question about that? Would you then describe what you're doing as recontextualization, in the sense that you're taking something out of its original context and placing it into another context, like, you know, people dancing in a new music concert, or
no, because I the club thing, it isn't like, I don't try to take club culture and bring it to music. Like, I have zero interest in that. I try to do a piece of new music, and I would say recontextualizing certain practices,
yeah.
but not taking things from
Not
one
the
environment
music.
to another. So like when I write new music or when I work with ensembles, I'm super aware that this is a new music ensemble being played in a new music festival for a new music audience. I would never do this if I'm working in another context, because the context for me is part of the composition, is part of the material. Just like a violin, the situation, the violin is specific that it is a violin. Just the violin is a violin. And for me, just a new music ensemble is a new music ensemble. And just a new music audience is the new music audience. And the new music festival is the new music festival. And it's all the violin. It's all like, it's the thing that is the specific thing of this thing. And then I try to use that to make something with it. That I have a certain purpose with personally, but that is beside the point.
Can you define a new music audience?
I would say within the at least Northern European festival circuit of new music audience, I would say there is a certain class, economical class, that this audience belongs to. And I would say there are practices. I wouldn't define the audience in terms of group, of like, these kind of people, but there is a shared notion of certain practices and of a certain tradition from a certain place. That's as far as I would go in defining it. Normally new music audience are, because it's a niche, they're normally well educated in the niche that they exist in. But I wouldn't define it as, is this kind of people, or is this group, genre, blah, 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 gender, etc., etc., etc. Rather than just as any audience. For example, if you go out a lot to certain, I mean, club culture is also just as varied. So if you go to, let's say you like to go to techno clubs, techno club audience in a certain, like experimental techno, for example, they are normally very educated in that. So they will behave in a certain way. It's somewhat predictable. We have certain rituals in new music that are more or less repeated. I would define it like that. And there are certain environments that are more or less repeated. The festivals are the same. We all know that if we go to most new music festivals, we will probably have a concert in La Sport Hall, or in some kind of improvised space, or in a classical concert hall. We will probably sit most of the concerts. There will probably be certain kind of aesthetical positions that I would say, at least in a big chunk, most of the audience are educated about. So my starting point is the presumption from myself being a new music audience goer and interacting with this group that is fairly homogenic in its education, I would say, about this music.
I guess just a note on the practices, something that came to my mind is how they differ from one country to another? Because I hear everything you're saying, relating to the German new music festival scene, and then I'm thinking, because I also work in the UK a lot, and thinking of the UK.
Oh no,
and it's completely different, because there we present new music in these kind of underground scenes, and people are drinking, because there isn't this kind of public funding for huge arts festivals. So it's very interesting to think that the same music is performed in completely different contexts. In Germany or the UK, for example.
I didn't say.
Belgium, it's also different.
Yeah, it's very different. I said Northern Europe. I didn't say Germany. Yeah?
But even within Northern Europe, it's much more diverse than what you describe.
I don't think it's that diverse.
But don't you think that they're like new music audience, but someone from that new music audience could also belong to other audiences? They could also
everybody
interact with other scenes.
Yeah.
From more very underground to very, I don't know.
Yeah. I am one of those people.
Yeah, so isn't then it, I don't know, kind of reductive to just describe it as just kind of this one group, even with some practices?
No, I'm not reducing the group or making a critique of the group. I'm just saying it is of the nature of new music audience to be educated about new music. That's basically all I'm saying. And this has been my experience. For example, one of these pieces I showed, I just did it in Serbia a couple of weeks ago. Kind of the same as when I did in Switzerland, or when I did in Germany, or when I did in France. They kind of know what this thing is, new music. I'm not saying that they behave all the same. Of course, people are different. I'm not saying if you're a new music goer, you don't belong. People are intersectional. People belong to many things at the same time. I'm just saying certain spaces invites us to have certain behaviors. It's a very neutral comment. It's not a critique or a critical. It's not a critical comment at all. It's, for example, we all came in here. We saw the chairs. We sat down. This is the only chair facing you, so you just assume I'm the guy speaking. Like there are certain things that we do kind of automatically just because we're people and we grow up and we're educated. It's not a critique on anything. It's just this. For example, if I would be doing a piece for this situation, I would probably work with this assumption. If we come into a hall and we see these chairs, we'll probably sit on them, and probably one person will come here, and probably everybody else will expect this person to start talking. And if they have a computer, probably something will happen in between the speakers and the screen. And this for me is material. I see it as material. So I can, just as if I play a scale on the piano, like a chromatic scale, and I start going up an octave, you kind of expect it to go an octave. And then if I don't play or I jump, you notice it, but it's not, it's just material. And then you do something with it. I do this with it. For me also, like the learned behavior of the audiences in these spaces are materials in a piece for me. For me it's not obvious. If I am in a space and there are chairs, for me that's a compositional decision. That's all I'm saying. If I want chairs, I have to decide that as a composer. That this is how the audience should listen to this music. And if that's my decision, then great. And if I think it's better if people stand, then that's also great. Any more questions?
I have one question. So you mentioned some bullet points in the very beginning of your talk about your aesthetic commitments, essentially also some conceptual commitments, like the focus on the body, the gaze and the oppositional gaze, what was the other, environment and context. And you also mentioned the individual aura of performers.
Yeah.
So I would like to know more about that. You mentioned about working with particular performers and not caring whether the piece will be performed by someone else. I would like to know more about
So in the last years, I mean, this is not always the case, but whenever I can, I try to work with very hand-picked people, because I know that they are a certain way in front of other people. Like they have a certain... This is something that comes it all kind of comes back to this, like I remember when I used to play so much in bands, is that, for example, with bands, you either see the band, the cover band is not the same as the band. Like, either you saw the Beatles or you never did. And you cannot have that experience after that. And there is something about that I think is super interesting. And for some of these pieces, the choosing of the musicians have to do with this. So for example, this, I just showed you this thing. These are like hand-picked people because I think they can sustain energetically as performers what they're playing for a very long time. And there is something that I cannot explain, or the aura about them as a group together, that works for the kind of music that they made in this piece for me. And I think it is a kind of energy that the audience also picks up on, or some of the audience, of course, not everybody. People are different. And this for me, again, is also kind of a compositional decision. Like, do I work with a specific musician because it's more than just playing an instrument well? It's because they have something that only they have, that they can kind of do this thing that people feel it? Or do I just work, these are all things that I think about a lot when I'm making music. Like, do I just want an ensemble that executes very well? That's totally fine. That's a little bit how we work in new music. We have these kind of institutionalized ensembles that work in a certain way. You give them a score, they perform, which is totally fine. For me, I would say this act is a compositional decision. Everything for me is a compositional decision. So I want a piece to be executed well, and it will be played for several ensembles. That's great. That's the nature of that piece. I want to do a piece that can only be played by these people because they have something, they have a je ne sais quoi that they have, and this music will probably not work. And I think all of us have this experience sometime in our life. Let's say we do a piece, we rehearse it with somebody, it's great, other musicians come and make it, they play exactly the same thing, but it's not really the same as the first one. Or maybe the second one has the and the first one didn't. And this for me can be a compositional decision. So like, these musicians specifically have a chemistry that for me works particularly well for a kind of music I want to write. Then I will work with them, and then only they will do this piece. And for me, it makes, in this case, if I make this decision, it makes no sense for other musicians to make it. And in this specific case, it also makes no sense for me to write a score that anybody else would understand. So for example, in this case, in this group, we wrote the score together. The piece was done, I had it all ready, and then we wrote it together so it would make sense for them. For them to perform. And that's it. And basically no other musician will understand what this group has written down. I would have to rewrite or translate, and probably wouldn't have the because the whole idea of the piece for me is that.
But this does not. So the compositional process was not collaborative. It was
No.
about notation. Okay.
I mean, it was mostly about the collaborative aspect was about notation more than anything. Yeah. As I said, like I have normally also extremely clear ideas of what I want, so it's difficult to make it super collaborative in terms of sound or structure. I'm always open for, I guess everybody's open for, we all have also the experience of somebody showing, we come with an idea and somebody like, but what do you think of this? And it's like, but that's a billion times better than what I thought. Let's do that. That, of course, but no, it's not collective composing, so to say. It's a very clear compositional idea, and then the notation we kind of agree between us, because they couldn't have scores in front of them. They had to have some other form of, like maybe a small thing or and they have to play for a very long time. So they have to have some kind of language that they understand to be able to play a 2-hour composed piece without a score. Yeah.
I mean, I could keep talking about that, but I don't know if there are other questions. if there aren't, I was just thinking of the music of Eliane Radig, and I mean like her last 24 years, where she really turned from analog synthesizers to writing for instrumentalists, and I see many interesting parallels but also differences, because she also works with individual musicians. I think it's a more collaborative compositional process, but there is no, just like you described, there is no score that can really be read by anyone. And I think that both she and the musician will make some notes that are only readable by them. So there is this part of this oral tradition there that, and then, but then when the piece is done, I think the musicians basically own it in a way, and they can decide to teach it to other performers and so on. So, but I think there are also differences, because you mentioned that you come with perhaps more clear ideas, although she also has a very particular aesthetic, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too familiar with her late work. I know some of her pieces and like them a lot. Yeah, I mean, the owning thing, I feel very much like once I've worked with this group and there is like, it's their piece in my head. It's like, now it's a performance thing. My job is kind of, I mean, I do perform in the piece as well, but like my composition job is kind of done, and it depends on them if the piece lives on or not, and that's fine for me. Once I think also everybody understands, every compositional decision is at the same time a decision of yes and no. You open a door and close another one. So for me, that's part of the deal. Like I choose to do it this way with this group, with the possibility that maybe the piece just gets played a couple of times, and that's fine, and that's totally okay. It makes sense within the framework of this composition, so to say, for me.
I just have kind of a small parenthetical thought, which is, how do you see this as being fundamentally distinct from how other composers approach their own collaborative process and work with ensembles? Because I imagine, to some extent, we're all thinking about, okay, what are the resources available to us, who's involved? And at the end of the day, this question of whether or not a piece is repeatable with different personnel is also a question of resources that are available to each individual person. Is it a commission? Is it for a particular ensemble, for a particular group? And I think, all of us, I imagine, consider the people that we're writing for and the situation and the performance space. So, yeah, I guess I'm curious, and whether or not we go down that road, but I'm just thinking, it causes me to think about, the way that those kinds of external factors influence each of our processes, as well as the way that it's perceived and the sonic material. You talked a little bit about form and the way that this kind of changes your thinking about form.
Yeah.
But yeah, I imagine to some extent this is true of most. Most.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying, I'm not presuming by any means that I am special or different than any other composer.
I don't mean to suggest that.
No, I think no. I think you're 100% right. I think everybody thinks about these things. I think the only thing that I actually also, all of this, what I'm saying, has been a very organical shift from just delivering scores, so to say. But of course, having in mind who you're writing for, getting a commission by an ensemble, you write a score, you rehearse with them, it has just been a very organic, adding of things for me into what composing means. The only thing that I would say is properly different for me and my experience, specifically in the last years where I've been focusing more on working with specific musicians, is that I have extremely long rehearsal phases that go for a year, for example. We will meet, we will try stuff out, we will meet again, we will meet again, we will meet again, which is also not something uncommon. But yeah, and kind of like a dance, there is a, like how dance pieces happen in rehearsal, there is somewhat of that for me that's become more and more present. But no, I would never say it is different than anybody else. I would say basically my understanding of it has just changed into the point where it is that everything I do, from the first decision to do it, is for me a compositional decision. Like if I decide to write a piece or to accept a commission from an ensemble, that is a compositional decision, because it already, there is a lot of things that get locked into that yes, so to say. I say yes, and now click, 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 click. Those are the instruments, those are the people. I think a lot of times when we work with ensembles, especially when we're starting, we don't have personal relations with everybody, and especially if you work with bigger ensembles, you might be closer to some, but it's not like the whole group. You know, there's all these things. And that's all for me part of what composition is, so to say. And for this kind of just closing, because I also have to go to the bathroom, for me, this is what I started with the body and the spirit and and that it's important for me to have like a experiential This also frames a lot of the yes and no's that happen for me, because and goes back a little bit to the aura aspect of it. This kind of situation, I don't believe is something that we learn in classical education, this kind of like stage presence, for example. And I normally have to get to know ensembles a little bit to know if this is something I can do with them. And also to know if that's something they want, because sometimes, and it has happened, that people come to some concert of mine and they're like, oh, we want you to do something with us. And then I sit down and start explaining a little bit, and it's like, oh, no, we actually just want to play a piece. This sounds like a lot of stuff to do, you know? So it's also kind of like a personality thing. Certain ensembles, certain people click more with it, which is, again, not special or unique. It's for everybody. Also, if you write this kind of music, there are more musicians that will like than if you write that kind of music, it's other kinds of musicians that will like. And this works just the same. God is telling me to stop. Yeah, that's it. I'm finished. Yay.